Hello again, my friends, and welcome back to Carpo's channel. Now I decided to make this video outside because it's a beautiful day out here, but hopefully I won't be drowned out by sirens or traffic noise or screaming people or barking dogs. But, you know, being outside is like one of those... It's my favorite place to make videos. And making them in the middle of the woods is probably the best spot because I don't get too distracted. But that's not really relevant to the video. I just thought I would start it off there. I want this video to be as real and straightforward as possible. And I want people to know that this is a subject that's near and dear to me, but one that I don't talk about too often, and one that I feel is probably one of the most important subjects that I do talk about in the few times that I do, and that's fear and anxiety. And I'm talking about it today because I had kind of an epiphany. Now, I woke up this morning around 5 a.m. Couldn't get back to sleep. Sometimes when I'm going to sleep, I'll just put on podcasts. I found this really good one on Spotify called Ology. And basically it's this lady who just takes some study of something, right? Ology is the study of. And brings on a guest, they do an interview, and they talk about whatever it might be. And this particular one was about procrastination, and I believe they called it agnology, or agnology, but anyhow, it was, oh no, that was the one about ignorance, but there was a separate one, and it was about procrastination. And the epiphany that I had was that procrastination is a form of fear. Now, I'm a hardcore procrastinator. I put things off to the last minute. The real part that got me was when I was listening to them talk about how there's two different reasons why we procrastinate. One could be because of our fear of failure, which is something everyone understands, but the other is the fear of accomplishment. And this one kind of rang, it was understandable with me. As a guy who has many different interests and many different things I would like to do, I'm always afraid to pursue one thing, because if I get too into it and I get really good at that, or if I spend a lot of time on this, I'll feel like maybe I won't enjoy it. It's like taking a class or a course in college and saying, oh, this isn't what I want to do anymore, or what I majored in doesn't interest me. But you have to make some decisions. So it's almost like a fear of indecision. But I'm no stranger to physical fear, but I would say that there's nothing in this world that really scares me. I mean, I don't fear dying. It's like most people say they fear death, but most of them, if you break it down, say they just fear not existing or fear suffering. But you can't really fear the unknown, I mean, unless you create that for yourself. But I want to just try to cover a few points that I think are important. Emotional intelligence is key for understanding why we feel the way we do, and for being able to analyze our fear response to things in this life. Mood swings and overreaction, these are things that I used to kind of cringe when I would be like, wow, I was just happy 5 minutes ago, and then I'm not now. What is it? And I'll sit here and I'll self-analyze, and I'll try to figure out what it was that set me off or triggered me to feel a certain way. Or, you know, even if I'm just feeling really positive, I'd like to know what made me feel that way. These are things you can't always pin down. But what I've learned is that they're normal. Not extreme mood swings where you're, you know, screaming at someone one moment and just kind of elated the next. I mean, we can have bipolar disorder, but that's not what I'm talking about here. So when we're angry, or fearful, we have a fight or flight response, right? We're all familiar with the fight or flight. But some of that flight, or some of that fight, often gets put on the wrong people. So what we end up is arguing about how we feel this way because of what this person did or this person said, or, you know, that we're going to take out our aggressions on others because we're fearful and we don't know who to blame for our own fears. Often this is how conspiracies come about. You know, we want to blame a group or an individual for something that happened because we can't really comprehend it, and it scares the shit out of us to realize that there's nobody driving the ship. There's no captain here. And don't mistaken that for saying that there's no God or no greater, higher power. What I mean is that there's no grand plan for humanity unless we create one for ourselves. and definitely not for our own individual lives. Now, people may disagree with that, but I think a lot of the fear we have is in failing or not taking action, not doing the things that we feel we should do in our lives, and fulfilling our own obligations to ourselves. If that makes sense. Sometimes we go down an empty rabbit hole to kind of divert from our own needs, and that's how, like I said, conspiracies come about often. Not that there aren't many that are true, but we go down an empty rabbit hole, and we come out the other side realizing there was nothing to gain from that. And it's often a way of distracting ourselves from what we really need to do, the personal work. And when you start to talk about those things, there's no real solid answers. You know, you get into that kind of this woo territory, the spirituality and whatnot. Don't be afraid of it. Don't shy away from it. Our spiritual nature is ingrained in who we are, however you want to define it. I don't ever feel like I've ever had to prove it or explain it, but that belief in something that's greater than us is part of what keeps us sane in some ways. Of course, we take it a little too far and we want to tell each other what God wants from one another, and then we create more of a fear response because we're afraid of not just going to hell, but having the wrong God, or fearful that another person is going to try to convert us or change us. Human nature is to talk shit to each other and try to convert one another to many different viewpoints. And so a lot of the fear comes from not knowing if we're doing the right thing, if that makes sense. We're not sure. And nobody is perfect, but we learn as we go. Nobody will ever be perfect. There's no human being that is like the model citizen, right? But you want to consider your company and your friends. Consider the people that you hang out with. Consider your associates. And ask yourself if they might be causing you fear or panic or putting you down or holding you back. And talk about our fears with a loved one, somebody we care about. And the reason, like I say, when I say fear, I'm not just talking about being scared of spiders or worrying about the future. This can be a form of procrastination, fear of not doing things right, or fear of doing things right and then having an obligation. So many different reasons. That All the G podcast, there was another one I watched that I can't recall, but or listened to. But also, I'd been thinking about stoicism and from my studies in the past, and how I kind of had another epiphany when I was getting ready to make this video, and that was that stoicism is nothing more than the conquering of fear. And I have to do more thinking on that because it just came to me, but it was the realization that if you fear the unknown, or if you fear confrontation, or if you argue because you're fearful of being wrong, whatever the root of the fear is, you're going to cause yourself more anxiety. Anger causes, and frustration causes your body to produce more cortisol. Fight or flight takes place. You are literally killing yourself with stress if you're anxious. So it's very important to conquer. And I'm no stranger to fucking literal physical stress. In my early 30s, about 12 years ago, 15 years ago, I was super anxious all the time for no reason. I'd get butterflies in my stomach. I didn't know why. Everything stressed me out. And I started to get to a point in my life where I said, what is going on here? And that's when I started understanding, manifesting your own reality in the sense that you're the only one that can de-stress you. Now, there are things like cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, which is a phenomenal tool for those who need somebody else to help them through maybe their anxieties, to conquer their fears. Even virtual reality is being used now. For example, put a bunch of spiders on you in VR and give you the feeling so you can overcome your fear, right? But are these things going to overcome our big fears? No. You can't overcome the big fear of the unknown because you can't have virtual reality of the unknown. It is the unknown by definition. So one point about being angry or fearful that I think is important is to ask yourself, what is the ROI on you being angry or stressed or fearful? There was a study where some people call it fear, some people call it stress, and depending on which you label it as, depends on what kind of person you are, or how much you take action on things. I don't recall the details, but it really comes down to semantics. I've always been the person to say, oh yeah, well, I conquered stress. I didn't realize stress was fear. I didn't realize procrastination was fear. but they're all really under that same umbrella. And the fear of the unknown is one of the scariest things to us. Which, like something that I heard, of course our failures teach us, and that's one of the greatest things about failing. We're afraid to fail, but when we do, we learn from it, right? But the fear of the unknown is ridiculous. Did you know that there's more people that die from getting crushed by vending machines each year than die from shark attacks? I think it's 4 times more people die from vending machines than shark attacks. I just thought that was a really funny statistic. It's not really... Well, it's the reason why I mention that is because we fear sharks. We fear it because it seems scary, but upon analyzing that, I realized it's more than just the shark and the sharp teeth. It's the unknown. When you're in the water, you have your head above water, you can't see what's coming at you. And it's in a medium that you're not familiar with, water. You can't move as fast. So it's a fear of the unknown. And when it comes to our society here, and what I've realized is what my real fears have been in the past. It's the fear of losing freedom. It's the only real fear I can think of. Nobody wants to die, but I don't fear it. It is what it is. I can't stop it. But I can protect myself as to how much I suffer, let's say. I've been to jail and I know how it feels. And I know that being stuck on probation or having to go through the system or being put in prison, which is even the worst, it takes away your freedom. And the loss of freedom allows you to completely drive yourself insane. I can see that being a legitimate fear, but it's because I've been to jail, right? And many of our fears are based on our past experiences. Even if it's not a legitimate fear, because we haven't done anything wrong, it's still a fear. If you've been attacked by cougars, you might not want to go hiking, even though it's completely unlikely you're going to get attacked by a cougar. I mean, the chances of one person getting attacked twice, it's very, very rare, but we still have that on our mind. So what about the fear of each other? The fear of people in our own country or our own neighborhoods. How warranted is that? We hear about a mugging or an attack on one person out of a city of 1 million people, and we say, oh my God, it's such a dangerous place to live. You start to wonder, wait, am I overreacting here? What are the real chances of my fears coming true? It doesn't mean you shouldn't be cautious, but it's really important to analyze this. I think that it's a fear of failure, and a fear of failure not just in jobs or in what we think we should do with our lives, but a fear of failure in relationships, right? They call it imposter syndrome when you think that you're not worthy of your own accomplishments, like, oh, I don't deserve this person, or I don't deserve this job, or I'm really not worthy of this, but then people put on a face and say, yeah, I am, okay, yeah, I've earned this. But it's hard for a lot of people to come to terms with that. Just as it's difficult to come to terms with you earning the great things in your life, it's even harder for people to admit that they're living in their own cesspool of their own creation. If you're surrounded with shitty people, and if all your circumstances suck, how much of that did you create for yourself? And so that's a legitimate fear of failure is what keeps us motivated, often. So yeah, fear causes procrastination, and that can be good or bad, but there's a lot more to it, such as neurochemistry. They found that a lot of these things aren't genetic. Fear or procrastination or likelihood of certain mental attributes are learned. Put it this way, we learn to fear. If you took a person who had been raised in a completely safe village and then you send them out on a boat or out in the woods, they're not going to think that a tiger's going to jump or that they're going to drown, because they've never been exposed to that. Depending on your parents and how they taught you, they might have taught you that the world is a scary place, that everybody has to fear these guys, or fear the atheists, or fear the blacks, or fear the whites, whatever it might be. People have constantly been in fear. And I'd like to add, for legitimate reasons quite often, because through history we have had instances where we've learned certain things to fear, like don't touch a hot stove, right? But other things are completely unwarranted. And as I said, the fear response literally kills us. Literally. I only use that word when it literally matters. And yes, fear literally kills you. It breaks your cellular structure down. I believe your telomeres. And this was a fascinating thing. I just remembered this. Your telomeres are basically these tail ends on your DNA, which, as they gradually decline over your life, you get older and you die. The idea and the theory is that we stop these telomeres from breaking down, then maybe we could live forever, right? But what was fascinating was that I found out that if you've ever heard of epigenetics, it's basically the genetics that are passed from parent to child directly, not just family lineage. It's the experience of the person. And this was in hot dispute for a long time, and probably still is. But apparently, people who have had an extreme stress response, like that have been sent into the war zones or have suffered shell shock, or call it PTSD, shell shock, whatever it might be in that time, and their children, they studied the children of people who went through extremely stressful times, and their children showed cortisol levels and certain hormones that reflected a stress response different than the average population, showing that if you stress out your whole life over stupid shit, and then you have children, you can pass that on through your genetics to your kids and stress them out just by your stress. And I think that's really important for people to realize. So, I mentioned that, fear can be a fear of failure. It can be a fear of accomplishment, as in, what happens if we do finish this project? We'll have to move forward, like the book I'm writing or the art project I'm working on, and all these different things that I finally realized I'm just scared to finish because I don't know which one I want to pursue. And if you don't make any decisions, you fail. You can't win by not being decisive. And so that's my procrastination and my lack of motivation. I've realized it's not a lack of motivation. It's not even a form of procrastination out of fear. It's rather indecisiveness. But then I broke that down and said indecisiveness can be fear as well, right? Not making the right decision. And yeah, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I'm 44, I'll be 45 next month, but it doesn't mean you can't learn new things. But as I heard somebody say, you can teach an old dog new tricks, you just have to get a new bone and work a little harder and a little longer. Because we do, as we get older, start to get a little stuck in our ways. And so, as I said, for anybody who is really fearful out there and can't overcome these things, you might want to read up on stoicism, understand that the viewpoint of others is not important to you, or shouldn't be. I mean, this is an issue that has I could write a whole book on that alone, but the fact that we want to impress other people. We want other people to like us. We want to think that we're doing right and that others care about us. But at the same time, you're not going to impress everyone. So you're going to have to take a certain amount of criticism and not give a shit. And just realize you're here for the time being, and you're human, and you're doing your best. We're all imperfect. People will point out your flaws and your faults, and it's so often a reflection of their own insecurities and projections. Which is why I never tease people or make fun of them for who they are. It's just the kind of people that do that, just cause other people to be more fearful of who they are. It's important to know who you are, stand by it, and say, hey, if you don't like it, fuck off. It's that simple, really. So the tough guy, the tough act, the tough guy and gal act, or the whole toxic masculinity or femininity is a direct reflection of that fear. The fear of, whatever it might be for the individual. I'm not saying that anybody who is an activist doesn't have a legitimate gripe. What I mean is that our fears cause us to act out in ways that maybe, just maybe, aren't the best way to express how we feel. By screaming at one another, if you are fearful and you're berating others for their beliefs or thoughts, you're just making them more resistant, and then they become more fearful of interactions like that. As my friend and I were talking earlier about, this country and pulling our heads out of our asses and getting back, I said, it's not a problem with government as much as a problem with the people, right? We all have different interests. It's natural. All through history we have. And it's a matter of not coming together and agreeing on everything. It's a matter of accepting each other for who we are and making the best of the situation, and a lot of that fear will subside. But that's just societal. When it comes to personal fear, only you can conquer it. Don't look to the external for help. You can watch as many positive, uplifting videos about positive thinking as you desire, but ultimately it has to come from within. I would study some ancient philosophy and things like stoicism and understand where and why our ancestors dealt with their emotions in a different way, or at least spent the time to learn about it. and themselves. So I guess that's about all I've got. Thanks for listening. I appreciate you all. Thanks to all my patrons on Patreon. And thanks to all the family and friends out there that have helped me become more aware of who I am by reflecting on the thoughts of others. And that's all we can do as humans. Looks like this video will be about 2020.